My name is Dr. Adrian Reinhardt, and I'm the last surviving member of the Kronos project team under the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. You've never heard about me or the project, because for all intents and purposes, we do not exist. But I'll be damned if NASA is going to let my colleague staffs be for nothing more than a classified folder collecting dust on the shelf. I know you probably won't believe me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just asking you to listen. The Kronos project was secretly established in 1988 by NASA and headed by the Department of Defense. The goal was to use deep-range satellites and telescopes to search the far regions of space for signs of life beyond our solar system. What we found was something far worse. In 2004, a signal was detected from the Boötes void, which is a vast span of nothingness in space nearly 1 billion light years in diameter. And when I say there is nothing, I really mean nothing. The void contains absolutely no matter, or even dark matter. It's essentially a definite null zone in the universe devoid of anything. All except for a single, continuous signal. I remember it like it was yesterday. My colleagues and I were sitting in a room that can best be described as a discount version of the mission control facility in Houston. We were all there at our desks, going over sheets of useless data from other reconnaissance scans, until the detection alarm started to go off, signifying that a signal had been detected from deep space. When we started going over the data, we triangulated the signal source to RA 14 hours 15 minutes 0 seconds / DEC plus 46 degrees 00. For those not versed in stellar coordinates, it pointed right smack dab in the middle of the void. Given the vast empty region of space, we at first had thought it was a system malfunction. But when we restarted it, it began immediately reporting a signal from those coordinates once again. We had originally thought we were just picking up fragments of a supernova or stellar burst of a long-dead star that had once been in that section of space. But that hypothesis was quickly uprooted when we were able to filter through background data and convert it into an audio format. It wasn't one long wave of static that you would normally detect from such cosmic events. It was a continuation rhythmic series of beeps that sounded eerily like a heartbeat. Now, of course, we were miles away from actually confirming or denying that this signal was the work of some advanced alien civilization hiding away in the empty regions of space, but we were still absolutely ecstatic over the finding. I don't remember seeing a single one of those faces in there not smiling from ear to ear while that beating pulsing signal repeated itself over and over again through the speakers of the control center. Following our little eureka moment, we followed the proper procedures and contacted our administrators and awaited further instructions as we aimed every satellite and listening device we had at our disposal at those coordinates. I remember feeling like a kid on Christmas Eve as I was driving home that night, so impossibly eager to see what the next day would bring. Unfortunately, the days would roll into months, then into years, until the next chapter of ongoing cosmic heartbeat signal would present itself. On August 24th, 2009, we were given the go-ahead by the Obama administration to send a reply signal into the same region of the void that the signal was still coming from. Although this was mainly done as a ceremonial milestone, given the fact that the region of space was nearly 700 million light years away, it would at least be 1400 million years for a reply to our message would even reach us. Given that the message was still a continuous repetition of 2 beats per second, we decided to use a similar frequency using a Morse code translation of hello. We popped some champagne and enjoyed the event, as much as one could in a top-secret research facility under a shadow section of the United States government. That night, around 3 a.m., I received a call from Dr. Westcott concerning the signal. I'll never forget how disappointed and yet terrified his voice was over the phone.
"The signal,"
he said.
"It just stopped."
For years, this seemed to be the end of our little interstellar communications, but we still carried on with our research, always keeping at least one monitoring device locked on the targeted coordinates of the void. We had a few detected bursts of information that piqued our interest at the time from other regions of space, but nothing like heartbeat signal. I wish I could tell you that's where the story ends. I wish I could say that, rather than typing this out as the last few hours of my life ticked away, that I was back in the facility searching the stars. But these are the wishful thoughts of a man at the end of his rope. It's at this time I've come to the realization that there are no happy endings. 8 months ago, while going through a routine series of scans, we received yet another transmission from the Boodies void. One I'm still trying to come to terms with. Not because it began again, but because it defied the very laws of physics. This was the message, translated in Morse code. Goodbye. It was a reply to the message we sent nearly 11 years ago. Somehow, a communication that should have transpired over a course of 1400 million years took place in just 11. It didn't make any sense. It still doesn't. None of what was happening made any logical sense. And that wasn't even the ridiculous part. As soon as the transmission was received and translated, the empty space around the center of the void began to expand as the surrounding star systems seemed to just blink out of existence. One by one, like a series of light bulbs being turned off, the stars began to go out. It was almost as if we were watching it occur in real time, which was another astronomical impossibility. You see, we can only observe as fast as light travels, which means if we were watching the Boodies void that is 700 million light years away, we would be seeing it as it was 700 million years ago. But now, we were watching an event unfold that was absolutely cosmically impossible. The rate at which the stars were vanishing was expanding the void at a rate of nearly 5 million light years a minute. I don't know how to describe it, other than saying that the dark nothingness was growing faster than the speed of light itself, seemingly consuming and extinguishing everything in its path. All the while, that message just kept ringing throughout the room. I don't know how or why, but very quickly the implications of this flooded over the control center as my colleagues and I began to realize the gravity of this impossible event. There was no argument amongst us whether this was possible or not. It clearly wasn't. Yet, it was happening all the same. At this rate, it'll reach the solar system in a little under a year. Dr. Waterford sounded weak and hoarse as he exclaimed the obvious. We were all thinking the same thing. In a little under 360 days, this cosmic expanse will reach our very own star system. We of course didn't know what would happen when it did. But in astronomy, you always think of the worst. If the sun was somehow extinguished by the void, as all the surrounding stars were, it would take a little under a year for the Earth to become an uninhabitable wasteland. That was, of course, even if the planet wasn't completely consumed and absorbed into nothingness as well. The entire time, I ran the calculations and possible scenarios in my head. The message we received kept popping up again and again, seemingly trying to answer the question as to what was going to happen. Goodbye. It seemed to hit Dr. Redmond first as he leapt to his feet and made for a dashing sprint to the exit. Soon, everyone began to follow. Under normal circumstances, you'd think that the man's cheese had finally slid off his metaphorical crackers. But given the current situation, given what we were witnessing, he may have been the most sensible one in that entire room. Then, just as a few others were making their way towards the exit, it suddenly dawned on me as well. The message, it must have been telling us something. It must have been telling us, and everything in its path goodbye. Whatever was in the Boodies void was coming for us. Coming for everything. At the time, we really weren't thinking of the consequences of our actions. We weren't focused on the repercussions of suddenly jumping a ship and going AWOL from a top-secret government program. The only thing racing in our mind was the wall of nothingness hurtling towards us faster than the speed of light. I went straight home and drowned myself in a bottle, hoping to wake up the next morning to realize everything was just some crazy dream. I wouldn't be so lucky, of course. In truth, I would come to find that out very quickly. That night, at about 1 AM, I was awoken by my phone. When I went to check the unknown caller, it turned out to be one of my colleagues, Dr. Maverick Burkham, who was one of the last men to even leave that facility that day.
You've got to run, Adrian.
He yelled, trying to catch his breath. I had wondered at the time what had caused him such physical exertion. What are you talking about? I asked as my head pounded with a throbbing migraine.
They're scrubbing the project, cleaning the house. Don't you know what that means?
That first sentence was all I needed to sober up. If what he said was true, Then, word had gone up the chain of command, and they had now come to the knowledge about both the discovery and its implications, as well as the science team's reaction to said implications. If they were scrubbing the project, then we would be the first to be cleaned up. How do you know about this? I asked him.
I tried to go over McGuire's house to discuss possible outcomes about the expansion. But when I got there, his house was burning to ashes, and Cuthbert and Lethbridge won't answer their phones. And on top of all that, I think I'm being followed.
Are you sure? I asked as I made my way to the bedroom window, searching for any sign of government hitmen.
Yes, absolutely. I've driven around my block twice, and now I'm on 58 South. There's been a black unmarked car following me the entire way.
I could almost make out what were sniffles through the speaker.
Listen, you've got to get the hell out of Dodge right now, while you've still got a pot to piss in. If you're half as smart as I know you are, then you'll...
Those were the last words I heard from him before the signal gave out. I didn't need much of a warning after that. I quickly got some things together and piled up in my Avalon and hit the highway. I've been on the run ever since, dodging any signs of suspicion by moving state to state, county to county. All until now. Once I post this, they'll obviously be able to track it. And I'm going to let them. I've been running all year, and I'm tired of it. Mainly because there doesn't seem to be a point to it any longer. Within a few months, the expense will reach us anyway. So, forgive me if I take the easy way out of this. I wish I could tell you in these final words that the governments of the world are working together to somehow try to stop this. But they know better. They know it's coming. And rather than be upfront with you, they want to hide it as long as possible. That's why there's been so much shit clogging the news and media here lately. They want total blanket coverage of so much chaos here on Earth. That way, no one looks up to see the inevitable. It's coming, and there's no stopping it. So, do me a favor, will you? Make what little life you have left worth it. Hold your loved ones. Go on that vacation you keep putting off. Do what makes you happy. Live. Goodbye. It feels strange coming back to you all after what happened. Or I guess I should rephrase that as, what didn't happen? For those unaware of the circumstances surrounding my original post, allow me to give some subtext to the events that had transpired. I'm afraid it will be rather necessary to explain the situation I now find myself in. For starters, my name is Dr. Adrian Reinhardt, and I was the last surviving member of the Kronos project under the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Our mission was to search the stars for signs of cosmic brethren, for any life beyond our world. In the early 2000s, we detected a signal from a dark and empty region of the universe, known as REPULSIVE. The signal was a series of small electrical pulses that, when converted into an audio format, resembled something akin to a heartbeat. After some time of deliberation and planning, we were authorized by the Department of Defense in the Obama administration to send a signal reply using the Morse code translation of "Hello." The following morning, the signal had ceased just as fast as it had begun. Over the years of silence that followed, it seemed that our only sign of extraterrestrial life had vanished, with no sign of return. That is, of course, until we detected yet another signal in December of 2009 from the exact same set of stellar coordinates as the one from years prior. The message was a set of static bursts that seemed to be miraculously resembling Morse code. When decoded, it gave the bone-chilling looping translation of "Goodbye." At the time, there were several things that seemed to defy logic. For starters, there was a conversation that seemed to have taken place in just a few months when it should have transpired over millions of years based on the cosmic scale of length between Earth and REPULSIVE. Secondly, The void itself had suddenly, and without any given reason, began to expand at an alarming rate, several times faster than the speed of light, and seemed to consume everything within its path. After a short time, we calculated that, give or take a few days, the expanding darkness will reach our own solar system in early December of 2020. With this knowledge, and implications of this flooding the command center like a tsunami, the members of the Kronos project quickly disbanded and jumped ship, as they say. It didn't take long for NASA and the DoD to add 2 and 2 together and began silencing the members of the project. While my colleagues were hunted down like dogs, I had managed to evade them for a short time, moving from state to state and county to county. I was able to seemingly evade my would-be executioners long enough to see the entire world swallowed up in an infinite expanse of nothingness. Most nights in my hotel rooms under different names, I would lay there in bed, thinking about the limitless possibilities of what would happen when it reached us. Would the planets be left alone? While just the star was snuffed out? If that was the case, how long could civilization survive without it? Would we be transferred to another universe? Would we be crushed by an overpowering gravity field? The ideas and scenarios that continued to present themselves only became less scientific hypotheses and more akin to Lovecraftian nightmares of possibilities. Eventually, as I began to weigh the possibilities, I realized that whatever was going to happen would be something I couldn't bear. I was a coward, and I knew it. And as I was too much of one to take my own life, I decided to make it as easy for my pursuers as possible, while giving the truth to all of you. In August, I laid out everything online in the assumption that the Department of Defense would locate me in a matter of hours and send a hitman unit my way to finish me off before the week's end. That wasn't the case, however. To my surprise, they never came. After purposefully staying in the same Motel 6 in Reno, Nevada for 4 continuous weeks, they still never came. I was still alive. It was then that I started to realize why. If this was all really happening, if the governments of the world really knew about all of this, then why would they waste the time just to kill me? I had already put the truth out there, and most took it as just another shifty possibility to end out a shitty year. Hell, most people took it as a damn joke. No wonder I was still breathing. But still, that left the truth of the matter even worse. The expanse was closer than ever now, and I was going to have to live to see it. I finally came to terms with everything after Thanksgiving, and decided that if I was going to go out with everyone else, I might as well do it with someone I loved. To give some further context, the relationship with my last living relatives, being my mother and sister, hadn't been the best the past 2 decades, and that was putting it mildly. When I was 20 and starting out in college, my mother had an affair against my father, causing him to fall into a deeply depressive state. That undoubtedly took him down the stressful path that led to his fatal heart attack 7 years later. I had never really forgiven her for that. No matter how bad she may have felt, and no matter how many times she had tried to make things right with me. But I figured, with everything about to end, if there ever was going to be a time to try and reconcile things, it would have to be now. Hello? A familiar female voice answered as I called my mother's home phone. It wasn't her, however. It was that of my younger sister Cassidy, who had stayed with Mom after our dad had died. I had spoken with her on and off over the years, but hadn't really had a chance to do so in about 11 months, for obvious reasons. Cass? I asked. Is Mom there? Adrian? Is that you? Yeah, I said, feeling guilty at the obvious pain in her voice. Listen, I'm sorry, it's been a while. Things have been rough. Can I talk to Mom, please? Mom? Yeah, I know it's strange. Trust me, can I please? Adrian, she said, trying to hold back what almost seemed like tears. Mom died. What? I asked. She died in October, she said quietly. This goddamn virus. I tried to call you and tell you. You never answered anything. Where in the hell have you been, Adrian? Cass, I said, trying to make it through the sentence despite the shockwave of emotions that was running through my mind. A lot has happened. I'm so sorry. I can't really explain over the phone. Are you going to be there at the house this weekend?
What? Adrian, I live here now. What is going on? What are you talking about?
Listen, I'm on my way there now. When I get there, I'll explain everything.
Adrian, what is going on?
Just stay home. I'll be there by Friday, I promise.
Adrian, just wait.
With that, I ended the call. Partly because I couldn't hear her voice right now. It was just so full of blame, in this eerie tone of judgment. I knew she didn't mean for it to be there, but I could feel it in the back of her voice, carving through my ego like a hot knife. And all this, with my mother, it was too much to process all at once. And if I had just continued to sit there in my motel room, I'd go insane trying to do just that. So I packed up what little I had left in my life into my car and started to make my way from Reno to my sister, who was now living in my mother's old house in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It was on the way there, while passing through Tennessee, that I truly realized how close to the end we really were. As someone who was never a fan of modern music, I was listening to NPR's coverage of the coronavirus and the disputed election results when they took a quick and sudden segment that I had been expecting and dreading for some time.
And now, we have Professor Thomas Leonard speaking to us remotely from the Keck Observatory in Mauna Kea, Hawaii.
The announcer said over the radio.
Professor Leonard, how are you? Very fine. Thank you for having me today.
The professor replied.
So, Professor Leonard, for those just tuning in, can you take a moment to explain what it is exactly that you have discovered?
More likely, what you're being allowed to divulge, I said to myself.
Absolutely. But you must understand, the discovery is not mine alone. We have a collection of astronomers from all over the world that have assisted with this. But in terms of the discovery itself, it's quite strange. How so? Well, we've discovered a region of space deriving from the Boötes void, which is essentially an empty region of the universe. The void itself appears to be expanding at quite an alarming rate, seemingly consuming everything in its wake. And when you say consuming, what do you mean exactly? Well, that's the rather tricky thing.
Professor Leonard began.
We aren't quite sure exactly what that means. All we know for certain is that the stars bordering the expanse are dissipating at a rate equal to that of the expanding rate of the void itself. And that's where we start to get into the realm of scientific impossibility. How so?
The host asked.
It appears that the expansion rate is fluctuating between the exact speed of light, and sometimes several times faster. But isn't that impossible? Exactly. It's breaking everything we know and understand about the laws of physics. We appear to be monitoring this in real time, while at the same time, the light from most of these stars are millions of light years away. Not a single one of us can even begin to come up with a solution. What appears to be the cause of this expansion? We haven't the first idea. And that's not even the terrifying part. What do you mean by that?
The host asked. For a few moments, there was silence.
Professor Leonard?
The host asked, unsure of what was happening.
Listen, the truth is, we've known about this for months now. The terrifying part about all this is that there doesn't seem to be a stopping point. Those who don't live in areas full of light pollution just have to look up in the night sky, and you can see it. A gaping black hole in the sky that's coming closer to us every second, and we can't do anything about it.
He was almost shouting now, and it became clear that he had been struggling with the implications of this just as I had.
Professor, whatever is coming for us isn't stopping, and there's nothing out there promising that we'll survive it. I don't know how long we have at this rate, maybe a week or two, but that's it. If you have loved ones, spend time with them. If you have a bucket list, best get to working on it because there is nothing we can do. Nothing.
I'm sure there were more of the ramblings that continued after I turned off the radio. But I had heard enough. There wasn't anything new. Everything he had said had already gone through my own head, and the last thing I wanted right now was to just hear it personified through the speakers. With a deep breath, I continued down the road on what was certain to be the final road trip I would ever take. I could have stopped that night for some rest, but decided to continue on. Because the professor had been right. We only had a little bit of time left here, and I wanted to spend it with my family, or what was left of it. That night, while getting some gas at a gas station along the Appalachian Mountains, I was able to see it for myself. There was just enough clearness in the night sky to see the inevitable. Up above, to the right of the Big Dipper, was just nothing. A vast hole of non-existence that felt like a hungry mouth of some nightmare child bearing down on Earth with each passing second. A shiver went down my spine as my thoughts once again went to the endless possibilities of what might happen when we passed the threshold of the unknown. But whatever did happen, whatever the human race would face, we would do so together. Early the next morning, I had made it to the beach house and was surprised to see the vast amount of active police units in the area. I knew most of Myrtle Beach had fallen into poverty over the past couple of years, but I hadn't expected something like this. When I got to the door of the house, Cassidy opened it with a face I hadn't seen since we had both been children. She was terrified, like she had just seen the boogeyman. "Cass?" I asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" "Haven't you heard?" she asked quietly. "Let's go sit down," I said, leading her into what I remember to be the living room. Inside, I would come to see exactly what she was talking about. The TV was on and tuned to NBC, where the anchors were going on endlessly about a state of panic and riots and protests erupting across the country. For a moment, I thought that the protests had finally clashed in some grand finale, but it only took a moment of reading the scrolling headlines of "The End of the World, NASA Press Conference in 4 hours." "Adrian," she said as I got her seated on the couch. What the hell is happening?" It was then that I spilled it all out for her. Every last detail. The only thing that seemed to be new information to her was that of the Kronos project itself and our communications with the Void, along with its chilling message, "Goodbye." It seemed that minor detail had been left out of the news feeds. "So, it's aliens?" she asked, starting to come to terms with the wild story that had been told to her. "They're doing this?" "I don't know," I said, desperate to give her a solid answer that was impossible to know for certain. "All I do know is that whatever it is, it's breaking every law of physics that's in the book. And it's still coming for us. How long do we even have?" "I don't even know that," I said, running my fingers through my hair. "We could have a few weeks, a few days, hell, a few hours. That thing's been changing its speed non-stop. So, who knows how long we've got left. God, I feel so fucking helpless." I began to shout. "My whole career, I've been able to understand the universe, because it made sense. It followed the rules. But this..." I trailed off, lost in the impossibility of what was going on. "You're scared," she said, rubbing my shoulder. "Everyone is. Hell, the world is seemingly tearing itself apart over this." "I'm sorry it didn't come sooner," I said, trying to hold myself together. "I'm sorry, I was such an ass over the years. I'm sorry I left you to bury Mom alone. I'm so fucking sorry." She interrupted my apologies with an embrace of such a love and compassion that it was almost alien to me. I just collapsed into it, as time seemed to stretch on, and I wish it had in that moment forever. The moment of serenity was broken by a series of blaring squalls from the TV as the words "emergency broadcast system" flashed in front of a black backdrop on the screen. The automated voice of the alert system then began to speak through with a cold validity.
"This is not a test. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration has issued a nationwide alert at the request of the United States government. Due to an astrological event of unknown origin, a maximum level threat has been issued to the public. Find shelter immediately and stay away from any open windows."
There was suddenly a cut of static as a series of high-pitched beeps could be heard in the background of the transmission.
"Remain in place until further notice."
As the static returned along with the beeps, I slowly started to make sense of them as they began to repeat. They weren't random. No, not at all. They were in a pattern, one that had been stitched inside my head for the past few months. "Goodbye." I stood to my feet, staring at the screen with a look of disbelief.
This message will now repeat. You really should have left well enough alone.
The broadcast system's voice was now taking on a clearly distorted version of itself, as the beeping Morse code was now constantly looping in the background. Suddenly, sirens that had once been used to signal hurricane warnings were now beginning to wail outside in conjunction with one another throughout the city. All the while, the distorted alert system continued to break down with every other word.
Goodbye. 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 Goodbye.
I turned the TV off after that. I just couldn't take any more of this. Those words had haunted me every night for the past year. And here they were, yet again, at the end of the world. Adrian, Cass said from across the living room. I turned and saw her opening the door to the back porch, overlooking the ocean. Without saying anything, I stood up to join her. We were both looking at the same thing now. The sun had just started to rise over the ocean, although what should have been a bright burning orange burst of light welcoming the new day was slowly darkening into a crimson shade of blood, overcasting the horizon. Every bone in my body was telling me that this was it. This was the moment I had been dreading for so long. As if to confirm it, the crimson sun began to darken further into a faint amber glow, until there was nothing but a finite totality of midnight darkness. 8 minutes, I said to myself. If it slowed down to be less than the speed of light, we still have 8 minutes. If it was as fast as the speed of light, it would have gotten us by now. I could still see much of the beach and ocean from the lights of the city and a few remaining stars above. But as far as the only source of light in our solar system, there was nothing. I felt Cass's hand grip my own as my heart started to thump harder in my chest until I was sure it would burst through. When suddenly, a gust of howling wind began to blow out from the coast, spewing sand and sprays of seawater towards us. The roaring of the increasing winds began to be drowned by a fast encroaching vibration of nothingness that was drawing closer and more overbearing with each passing moment until it became unbearable. I was able to catch a quick glance at the coastline to see that only part of it was there. I could see a few hundred yards out into the sea, until there was a complete absence of anything. The thunderous static of vibrations drowned out the sounds of everything as the end of time crashed down around us. The final action of my life would be to embrace my sister once again as the howling abyss consumed us both. I wanted to say something, anything to her in the end, but without seeming to have any further control of my actions. A single word slipped out from my mouth as it echoed throughout the infinite expansive halls of nothingness. Goodbye. It was at the final moment of my life and existence itself that I suddenly shot back up by my desk in the command center of the Kronos Project HQ in Lassen Peak, California. Everything alright, Dr. Reinhardt? A muffled, familiar voice a few feet away from me asked. When I turned, I was met by the face of Dr. Mavry Burkham, my old colleague who had been the first to warn me about the extermination of the team when we all abandoned ship. You look like you've seen a ghost. What? I tried saying as the reality of this situation began to hit me like an oncoming train. What's going on here? It was at that point that the man who had been dead for half a year gave me a look of genuine confused concern. He lowered his face mask to speak a little more personally. Is everything okay? You don't seem yourself. How am I here? I asked in a wild daze. How are you here? How are we here? I was starting to draw the attention of the other members of the team now, all of which had been dead until about 5 minutes ago. We're at work, Dr. Burkham said concerningly as he began to give a few confused glances at some of our colleagues. What's wrong? The Expanse! I nearly shouted. What happened to the Expanse? The Expanse? He asked. If I hadn't known any better, it almost sounded like he didn't have any idea about what the hell I was talking about. Yes, the Expanse. The one from Boodi's Void. The one that started after it sent the reply. That Expanse. Dr. Reinhardt, he began. I don't really know what you're talking about. There hasn't been any reply from Boodi's Void, and there hasn't been any Expanse. Why would there even be one to begin with? You know our reply wouldn't reach us for at least 1.5 billion years. But I was nearly out of breath as sweat began to beat down my head, accompanied by the tribal war drum-like beat of my heart in my chest. It was at that point I was able to take in the surroundings of the Kronos HQ. Everyone inside was now wearing protective masks, and the computers and operational desks had been oriented in a way to allow for social distance work. But none of this had happened when we received the signal and evacuated. None of this was right. Listen, Dr. Burkham said, putting his mask back on and walking over to me. Go outside for a minute and get some fresh air. Go home if you need to. You don't look the best. I couldn't say anything, and even if I wanted to, I didn't have the slightest idea what I would. Without another word, I got out from my desk and made my way out through the facility, walking by dozens of individuals who I only knew as ghosts after what had happened. For about a good solid hour, I sat at the smoking court by myself, trapped in an endless looping maze of thought, with no beginning or end. When I had checked my phone, it told me that it was the 20th of January, 2021. But that was impossible, given that the whole damn world had ended on December 4th. I felt like the banks of my mind were slipping moment by moment into a mudslide of complete insanity. Rough day? A man asked behind me as he took a seat at the table. When I turned to face him, I was met by a man seemingly in his mid-40s. He was wearing a dark blue button-up with the sleeves rolled up. Not exactly the formal attire worn by the members of the project. But that wasn't the strangest thing about him. I hadn't the faintest idea who he was, because I knew everyone on the project, even the government officials that would visit the facility on their routine update visits. But there were far stranger things that occupied my mind at the time. You, I began. You don't know half of it. Well, if it helps, the man said. You're doing a very fine job at handling yourself, given the circumstances. What do you mean? I asked. Well, where should I start? Your team going extinct, going on the run all those months, a seemingly never-ending black void consuming all reality, the loss of your mother, the entire planet ending the day you reunite with your sister, and then suddenly coming back to a world you saw destroyed. I have to say, you're doing remarkably well right now after everything you've been through the past couple of months. I felt all the air leave my chest, as if I had just been punched in the gut. What did you say? I asked weakly, trying to regain my breath. You don't need me to repeat it, the man said. And I really don't think you want me to. You've had to live in that hell for quite some time. How do you know about all that? I think the right question you mean to ask is, why doesn't anyone else remember all about that? He replied, lighting a cigarette and inhaling deeply. I couldn't respond. Once again, my mind was just frozen like a deer in the headlights as I tried to figure out just what the hell was going on. You know, he said, turning his back and leaning against the table. I think I may have gotten a little carried away back there. But given everything you all were dealing with back then, I just wanted to test the waters, see how far I could take things. I mean, testing the outcomes was the whole reason I created all this to begin with. He slowly swept his hand across the air, as if to take in a proud moment of triumph in the world around him. What? How? Created? I was stumbling hard to try to find the thoughts necessary to even form a coherent sentence. He then turned back to face me, taking another hit from his cigarette. Yes, but let me stop you right there before we get carried away here. I'm not some all-knowing god of the universe who created the heavens and the earth for my glory. I did create it, but rather with one hell of a computer system and a lot of hell for my team. What? I said, stepping closer and closer to the edge of insanity. The man across from me discarded the cigarette and rubbed his face for a moment. It was clear he was starting to find part of this conversation either struggling or uncomfortable. Have you heard of the term simulation theory? Before I could even begin to respond, he continued. Well, there was a group of us at NASA that were curious about the prospects of such a creation theorem. So we set out to design a computer system large enough to run a program that would digitally simulate the calculations presented in the Big Bang Theory. We were actually stunned with the results. One sped up, we were seeing an almost one-to-one perfect recreation of the entire universe. We then took it a few steps further and wanted to experiment and test to see how accurate the theories of evolution were. So, we created the solar system within the confines of the system and simulated the early history of Earth and saw for ourselves the evolution of life on Earth to the very rise of humanity. As he continued to speak, I started to wonder if it had already happened, if I had already slipped and fell into complete madness. And that's where things got really interesting. We saw a nearly perfect adaptation of our entire civilized history, from the nations of the Earth to the wars that were waged. We were seeing our entire history unfold in a complete separate simulation. We were seeing the same social issues, the same political discourse, the same environment destruction. Almost everything was completely identical to our own world. So we began copying and running different simulations simultaneously to test and hypothesize how our world will react to certain circumstances and events. That way, we could plan and adapt our reactions ourselves to be better prepared for whatever may come our way. Was this true? Was I, we, the whole damn planet just nothing more than a fucking rat maze for this guy? Upon even considering this, I came to the conclusion that I had finally completely lost my marbles. And that's where you come in, he said. I wanted to test and to see how the scientific world would react to a spatial anomaly that defied every laws of physics, as well as how civilization as a whole would react. I even decided to have a little fun and throw in some otherworldly communications just to see what would happen. But I saw in the end that it had really been nothing but a waste of time and energy. So I reset this individual simulation and everyone in it, so they wouldn't know the wiser. But why do I asked, slowly beginning to accept what was being told to me. If I had really experienced everything that I had, and was now being told an answer that seemed to explain all of the impossibilities, then maybe this whole thing wasn't as impossible that it had originally seemed. Maybe I still had some sanity left there after all. To be honest, I'm not really sure. When the simulation resets, it sometimes leaves a digital echo in the source code, and sometimes that is translated and retained back in the memory banks of certain sims or NPCs. You had been doing just fine until your firmware seemed to update for some reason. At times, it's like the simulation has a mind of its own, he said with a small laugh. I buried my face in my hands, and my leg began to shake up and down nervously as I tried to digest everything being said to me. And that's partly why I'm here, he said. I then looked up at him, almost literally hanging onto my seat as I waited for him to continue. You see, NASA, well, my NASA has been working with the Department of Defense to develop a new system for the simulations. A system much more advanced and easier to maintain. But, well, part of that process involves the system like the one running your simulation to be wiped and repurposed for the new hardware. It didn't take long for me to realize what exactly was going on here. After all, it wasn't rocket science, and even if it was, that was my specialty. If there was even a chance in hell of this being true, then the fact of the matter was pretty simple. If these systems were really running, well, everything, then when they were repurposed, we'd be gone. We'd be dead, wouldn't we? I said blankly as I stared at the table. Well, that would constitute being alive in the first place. What? I said with a sharper tone than I had originally intended. The man didn't look offended, rather more interested in what else I had to say. Constitute being alive? What the hell does that mean? I'm alive. We're all fucking alive. I think, therefore I am, he replied with a smile. I believe. I know you're alive, Adrian. But to the rest of us, but to the rest of my company, you're nothing more than a strand of ones and zeros, simply simulating real life. Well, what about everyone else? What do they think? Everyone else? There is no everyone else. Nobody outside of the project knows about this. I mean, can you imagine the ramifications about the world finding out there was a perfect simulation of the planet and every living person on it? Just think about the kind of worms that will open up Pandora's box on a scale hitherto undreamt of. For about the 100th time, in just the past few hours, I was completely lost for words. I had just witnessed the entire world end, only to be told that it was just an entire simulation to begin with. And not only that, but the entire simulation was going to be deleted along with the rest of us. But like I said, that's why I'm here. Because I know that you're alive. And the implications of that is something I'm just starting to come to terms with myself. I mean, if life was able to be perfectly simulated on an algorithm based on the creation of our own universe, then who's to say that we aren't the digital recreation of another simulated universe program? Maybe that in itself is the meaning of life. An endless string of universes simulating other universes forever and ever. Then, what do you want? I asked, mustering the energy to look at my creator face to face. To give you a chance, he replied. You see, we have the ability to alter the time-lapse of the simulation greatly. That's how we were able to watch the creation and expansion of the universe in just a few hours. All the while, time continues as a normal flow relative to the simulation itself. Now, at the moment, I'm talking to you virtually as your universe passes on a one-to-one temporal scale of my own. What I'm going to do is speed the time up as long as I can. That way, you all have a chance to live. He turned his back for a moment, as if he was looking at someone who wasn't there. Now, I can't say how much time will pass for you. My supervisors are waiting behind me as we speak, waiting to take the system offline. But I still want to do what I can. Then, why are you even here? Why come to me of all people to tell me this, rather than just doing it? Because I want to give you a choice, he said with a look of lonely compassion. A choice? What choice? Well, like I said, you're the only person left that retains the memories of what happened over the past year. What really happened? The choice is this. I can locate the remaining source code from the last simulation and remove it from your subsystems, your memory. You'd go on like nothing ever happened for as long as you have left. Or you can remember everything and continue on with that knowledge. What? I began. After everything I've been through, everything I've seen, why would you even begin to ask me if I still want to live with that? He took a moment to contemplate how to properly answer my questions, until he smiled. Perspective, he said. Everyone knows they're going to die, but it seems that when someone realizes how close the end actually is, they have a newly found perspective on life and its delicacy. Am I wrong in saying that only when you came to terms with your demise that you decided to contact your mother after all those long years? As I looked back at him, he seemed to realize that his words and their true implications were starting to come through. Take people who have near-death experiences, for instance, which is the only true word for what you have gone through. Most people have a completely new outlook and appreciation on life after nearly having it taken away. If you think this is something that could help you for what's left of your life, I want to give you the chance to take advantage of it, he said, still smiling. I do realize how much of a Morpheus moment this is for you right now, but the fact still stands that there is a choice that needs to be made. And that choice is yours. The weight of his words began to build up around me to the point where thinking about their implications almost made me claustrophobic in my mind. So you don't know how long we'd have left? I asked. Unfortunately not, he replied. It could be weeks, months, years, but this really doesn't change things. The whole world could come crashing down in a ball of fire tomorrow, but you're never promised to live the rest of the day to see the next. Every second of our lives is precious, don't you think? There are moments where I wish I had chosen to forget everything and carry on my life as normal. But those moments are few and far between these days. He was right. There really is a beautiful new perspective I seem to have on life now, given everything that has happened over time. And because of it all, I've been able to reconnect and begin to build back the relationship I had with my sister. I even started going on a few dates every now and then. Some of you, those who choose to believe anyway, may wonder how I've come to cope with all of this. And in truth, it's exactly what he said. I know that the end is coming sooner rather than later. I know that one day I will cease to exist, the same as all of you. One day we will meet the precipice of oblivion and not return. One day the lights will go out forever. But in truth, how is that different to anything we knew before? Yes, it's a simulation. Yes, NASA is currently active in the process of killing each and every one of us. But for now, for this shining moment, We have life. So, if there is anything you take away from this, listen to me now. Don't take what's left for granted. Because the hourglass is running empty. And the stars will be going out. Time, as it always does, is running thin. So, take the moment and cherish it. Live. Goodbye.